Now that we've covered validation and basic CRUD inside of a MongoDB with Mongoose on top, maybe it's time to stop worrying about just a single model inside of our application. After all, it's not incredibly frequent that we would end up with just a single user or single user model with no other type of resource inside of our app. So I think maybe a good practice or a good way to extend this application would be to add in another type of resource on top of our users. So not only have users, but some other type of resource. Maybe, to stick with our theme of post count down here, maybe we could have a list of or a collection of different posts. So like a user could create a post, and once a user creates a post, they would kind of like belong to them in essence. So we might say that a user has many posts because a user can create many different posts. And by the way, when I say post, I mean specifically like, say, a blog post or something like that. So let's think about how we would add in a collection of posts, or just like I don't even really want to use the word collection right now. I want to just think, how would we add in the idea of posts inside of our application? So your first intuition might be, well, let's create another Mongoose model to represent a post, right? Right now we've got a Mongoose model for a user. Let's make another one that will represent a post. So if we did that, we might end up with something like this. We would end up with one type of model, like a user, which would have a name. And we would also have another type of model with a title, with something like, whatever the title of the blog post might be. So these would be two completely different resources. This is an approach that we're looking at right here that would make a lot of sense inside of a SQL type database or a relational type database. Inside of a NoSQL database like Mongo, we start to kind of like twist this type of relation between these two models in some fashion. The important thing to remember here is that I said explicitly a user has many posts. So whenever there's a post floating around, it is always associated with exactly one user. With that in mind, inside of our Mongo database, a more reasonable type of data structure might be, rather than to have a separate collection of users and a separate collection of posts, would be instead to still have a single collection of users, and then inside of a user model, we could have a list of different posts that belong to them. So maybe our user Joe, with the name of Joe, has a post property which contains 3 posts inside of it, each of which has a distinct title property. This concept of nesting records or nesting associations rather than spinning off completely new collections is at the core of what makes Mongo Mongo. We'll talk a lot more about possible design schema in the future, but for right now, I want to just kind of walk down this path of seeing what it would be like if we had a collection of users where every user could have a list of posts kind of embedded inside of them, so to speak. So every user can have the ability to have multiple posts. So that's our goal. Okay, so just thinking about this in a different fashion, this is our user model, or a diagram of our user model. Right now, our user model has a user schema. The user schema has a name, a post count, and then I'm suggesting that we add to it the ability to have an array, like there's supposed to be a list right here, of posts. Then we'll have a post schema, which contains a title. One thing I'm going to say right now, and I'll repeat it probably several times between now and the next section, is that whenever we embed a document in this fashion, we will not create a separate model, like I'm specifically using the word model here, to represent the nested resource. So we will not make a post model. Instead, we will make only a post schema. So we'll write some amount of code to describe what a post inside of user should look like, but we will not make a distinct Mongoose collection, or a distinct Mongoose model around a post. The reason for this is that Mongoose models, like our user model, are made to represent distinct collections that are sitting inside of our MongoDB database. But in the case of posts, this is not a distinct collection. In RoboMongo, we're not going to have a list of posts on here. We are going to only have a list of users, or a collection of users, and inside of that, each user can possibly have a list of posts. So because of that, we will not be making a post model, we'll only be making a post schema. Whew, okay, so lots of talk about post and embedding and all this kind of good stuff. Let's continue the next section and figure out exactly how we are going to make a post schema and embed it in some fashion inside of our user model.